Hi there. Welcome back to my channel. My name's Megsy if you're new, and today I will be doing my April wrap-up. I read a total of 8 books, which is a lot, and I have some of them here. 2 are library books, and 2 were from little lending libraries. The rest were library books. All of these books are blue, and that is pretty much on point because unintentionally I read a lot of books that deal with water themes, whether it is sea creatures, mermen, islands, rivers, things of that sort. So, yeah, if you are interested in hearing me analyze and talk about any of these 8 novels that are listed below, stick around and we will get started. The first book I finished in the month of April was An Island by Jennings. This was a longlisted for the Booker Prize in, I think, 2022. It's a very short, tense little novel. It follows this older man named Samuel who is living off the coast on a tiny deserted island off the coast of an unnamed African country. He's an old man. He's crabby. He just wants to live in solitude. And he is a lighthouse keeper. And lately, a lot of these bodies of refugees have begun washing ashore. And one day, a dead body washes ashore. And it turns out the body is actually still alive. And so Samuel nurses this stranger back to health. The only thing is that they don't speak the same language at all. And so they have to gesture and use sign language essentially to communicate. And so Samuel begins to concoct this wildly elaborate fantasy in his head that this man is a criminal. That's why he was fleeing. And he is going to kill Samuel and take over the island. And caring for this man also begins to trigger all of these flashbacks as to how Samuel got to be living alone on this little island in the first place. And we see his life in this unnamed African country that is essentially kind of an amalgam of various African nations during their post-colonial, decolonial phase that started in the 60s when the European colonial powers left. So we see this place where there is this revolt, this revolution against the European power, and then a new local indigenous president is elected, and then he's kind of corrupt. The people get restless again, and then exploiting on that restlessness, a dictator rises to power. And this is essentially not just in Africa, but if you've studied post-colonial histories of a lot of global south countries, this is essentially what has happened time and again. And so Samuel, we learn, was a political prisoner under this dictator. The novel is like just a little over 200 pages. When we are in the present, it is very tense. It is kind of, I think, fast-paced. You're just wondering what is going to happen. And then the ending just sort of like comes out of nowhere. You're really not expecting it. You're left guessing until the very last page as to what is going to happen. I actually enjoyed this. I would rate it 4 stars. I think that the only thing was, and this was done deliberately, the deliberate vagueness of this place. I know she did it on purpose, but I really wanted to know where it was because I don't really know like a lot of African countries' histories. The most I know is more like North Africa, the Maghreb, and Egypt. I know a little bit of that history. And so I was just like wondering, like, what does this take from? And the closest I could see was the dictator. I saw a little bit of Muammar Gaddafi in the dictator, and I also saw some of Idi Amin, who was a dictator of Uganda. I think that's how you say his name. And then there's even, it's funny how dictators and wannabe dictators all are similar. The dictator who was formerly known as the general. There's a quote here I just thought was like so on point of like every dictator ever. By then, the general, who would later become the dictator, was gaining popularity with the masses. He did enter the slums, did spend time with the people, listening to their grievances. When crowds gathered, he talked to them with a booming voice. And when still more gathered, he lifted a bullhorn to his mouth and shouted so that the topmost flat seemed to sway with the reverberations. He spoke to the fears of the people, made promises to them. He blamed foreigners for their suffering, vowed to end their troubles. So Trumpian. And also, Idi Amin very much blamed the Ugandan people's problems on Indian refugees that were fleeing to Uganda. So that deliberate vagueness and me trying to kind of pierce together in my head, I know she takes from other African countries too. I'm sure there's some of South Africa in here. I still wanted to know, like, where is it? Even the unnamed island. And then I also had trouble initially picturing Samuel because Karen Jennings is a white South African woman. And I wasn't sure if she was writing a black character because race is never explicitly mentioned. And in the beginning, when Samuel calls the authorities about dead bodies washing ashore, the police woman is like, well, are they darker than us? And then I was like, wait, where are we? Like, is this Cape Verde? Look, I don't know. So that deliberate vagueness did bother me. But I do think overall, I know it was done on purpose as sort of this stand-in for all post-colonial countries, and I think the tenseness and the complexities, the tenseness in the present as well as the complexities of this character's life and who he betrayed and why, I think was pretty well done. So, like I said, 4-star read. The next book I read in the month of April was The Pisces by Melissa Broder. I was not actually expecting to enjoy this as much as I did. I have been avoiding Melissa Broder's work for a bit because I know that she writes very graphic depictions of sex and bodily fluids, and I feel like she's very polarizing. Like, people either love her work or they hate it. But I actually really enjoyed this, and I was surprised. So this follows a woman named Lucy, who is dog sitting at her sister's house in Venice Beach, Los Angeles. And Lucy she's in her late 30s, and she just went through a breakup with her long-term boyfriend that wasn't really going anywhere. And her life is also stagnant in general. She's writing this thesis dissertation on the Greek poet Sappho, and she's been in grad school for like 9 years. And she's just mentally blocked and also feels blocked in general in her life. Like, she's just like, she has this urge and to just like do something, but she feels like she can just never be content, and she just wants some sort of excitement or thrill to fill the void. And so at her sister's house, she starts to go a little haywire, and she starts going on all these random Tinder dates with men. And then she finds this support group for women who are like sex and love addicts. And then one day she sees this mysterious swimmer swimming off the coast near where her sister lives in the early morning hours, and he is actually not a swimmer at all. And so madness and erotic mayhem ensue. So I think this novel, it really captures the fine line that exists between obsessive love and madness. And it raises that age-old question I think a lot of us struggle with, like, what is love? Passionate, intense lust can feel amazing in the moment, but it also can mentally unravel a person. And I think there's too a lot of questions in general about, like, well, Lucy is very like reflective, like, what is this void that is within us, and how do we fill that void? And do we know the difference between wanting to change our lives versus just being content with healthy stability? I love the way, at least in this novel, Melissa Broder writes about men and women's romantic relationships. I mean, she just hits it on the head. I think she touches on a lot of questions that women are confronted with, like, especially when you're in your 30s. Like, do I actually want to marry this person, or am I just looking to get married for the social currency that it brings me? Do I actually desire a child, or am I just being told that I should? Am I actually looking for genuine love, or do I just want to have instant gratification and feel desired? And so all of those questions Lucy grapples with. I would really recommend this. I mean, yes, it does have a sort of magical realism, fantastical element, but I think the way she wrote it was so seamless that I didn't really feel jarred, or my suspension of disbelief didn't waver at any point. I think that, yes, like, some of the sex scenes are a little graphic, a little gross, but, I would recommend this really, especially for, like, women who are in their 30s. The only thing, trigger warning, there is some animal neglect, and I know why the author did this. to sort of like juxtapose the pure love a dog or a pet can give to like fleeting love that you could have in like a romantic hookup situation. But it's a little upsetting to read, so just trigger warning on that. But yeah, I also like to, it's sort of like a spin on like, I think a woman conforming to her lover's world, where in traditional merman tales with humans, the woman, whether she's a mermaid or a woman, she always has to like conform somehow to her lover's world. Broder kind of plays with this. So yeah, I really enjoyed this. I would rate it 4.5 stars. The next book I finished in April was Made for Love by Alissa Nutting. This book was goofy. This book was so goofy and off the wall, even for me. And it was just like too much. So this is this is about a woman named Hazel who is married to this millionaire tech mogul that is very clearly based on Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, probably Steve Jobs. And she leaves their marriage. She runs away because he wants to implant a chip into her brain to mold their minds together. And so Hazel runs away to her dad's trailer park, and she hasn't seen her dad in years, and he has a new friend that is a sex doll that he is treating like a real girlfriend. While Hazel is like at her dad's, she knows her husband, this tech mogul's name is Brian, has the technological abilities to track her down. And so she's trying to run, always like looking out her shoulder. And then there's also this side plot of this guy named Jasper who's a con man. And he's a con man because he scams women, rich women, by pretending to fall in love with them, have this whole fake relationship, and then right at the point when they're about to be married, he ends up convincing them to drain their bank accounts for him, and then he leaves. Which is, I was not, like, this whole subplot was just, first of all, this is literally the identical thing of the show, Imposters, which incidentally also came out the exact same year this book was published, 2017, only it was a woman that was doing this to men. It was on Netflix as like a older show. I don't know if it's still around. I think Bravo originally put it out. So I was first of all like, okay, I'm not really impressed with this subplot because I know I have seen something just like this before. And so anyway, one day Jasper, he has this weird incident in the ocean and he can no longer do his job because he now has a sexual attraction to dolphins. This is where it started to, like, lose me, okay? Like, Jasper's story and Hazel's, they link up, but I'm not going to really get into it because I don't want to give spoilers. Yeah, this book just was definitely a disappointment. I think by the end I was kind of ready for it to be done. It just was one of those books that was trying so hard to be weird and quirky for its own sake, and it was too much. It just felt like... There's also... It is very much dark humor, and... for me, but there's like also this weird tone of like childishness underneath and kind of cartoonish vibes that I just like wasn't really into. Characters would also go on these like weird long thought tangents that really didn't serve any purpose other than just to like display, hey, this story is really weird. These characters are really weird and quirky. And you're just like, what? Like, how does this add, though, to the story? So, yeah. And also the ending just wrapped up a little too conveniently. So, I don't know. I would say this was maybe, like, a 2.5 to 3 star book. I can't really recommend it. It's just, it wasn't my cup of tea. I mean, I like the themes that she was going for. I like how she was talking about, like, this technological dystopia and... surveillance, and especially like surveillance of women's bodies, and of course like I'm gonna love anything that's like a satire on Elon Musk and these tech bros, but it just fell flat. It was not that great, I thought. The next book I finished in the month of April was Run River by Joan Didion. This I found in a little lending library, shocker, And this was Joan Didion's first novel. She published it in 1963. And unpopular opinion, I like this more than Play It As It Lays. Okay, so this book has a very old Hollywood kind of quality to it. I could totally see this as being like a film noir or one of those dramas that came out in maybe like the early 60s, late 50s, as the film industry was starting to drift into more gritty realism, like New Hollywood. The only thing with this book, though, is that it is kind of slow. I would say like the first 75 pages are slow, and then it does start to pick up. But I have noticed this in general with older books, and I think this is why it's good to read older books from like the mid 20th century and onwards, because it's almost like I have to use a different part of my brain. Even though I primarily read literary fiction, I feel like even modern lit fic that has been published within the past couple years, it's still something about it that has a sort of faster pacing to it. And this really makes you slow down and like enjoy the story in order to like fully absorb it. So this follows this wealthy couple in California in the late 50s, Everett and Lily, and they are descended from American pioneers. They come from old money. They have a lot of land. Everett's family has this hop business, really, a brewery. And the beginning of the novel opens with a literal murder. Literally opens with a bang. And then we get into this flashback. And so the bulk of the novel, we see their time growing up and their family dynamics. And then they end up marrying more out of like social obligation. And then we sort of see like their marital breakdown, essentially. They both sort of betray each other in different ways. Lily has affairs with like a bunch of different men, and then Everett is just like emotionally negligent. He's not really there. And so the whole book is really like an examination of the disintegration of their marriage. And I think probably Didion was also trying to illuminate like the disintegration of like the old guard, essentially, into something new. It's really like a family tragedy sort of novel. There are some great lines. I did want to highlight one on page 4, or beginning of chapter 4. Was there ever in anyone's life span a point free in time, devoid of memory, a point when choice was any more than some of all the choices gone before? So I enjoyed this. I think it was a really solid debut. I would rate it 4 stars. To me, it was a lot more memorable than Play It As It Lays. And yeah, if you want to check out Joan Didion's first work, I would definitely recommend it. The next book I finished in the month of April was Catalina by Karla Cornejo Villavicencio. This was actually just released last year, and it is a novel, but it reads more like a memoir, because I think a lot of it is very autobiographical. It is about an Ecuadorian American woman at Harvard in the early 2010s. She graduates college in 2011. So this character is like literally a year younger than me. And she is undocumented. She came to the U.S. when she was 5 years old because of this family tragedy. And due to a flaw in the immigration system, she actually cannot become naturalized until she actually literally marries someone. And she lives with her grandparents in Queens when she's not at Harvard, and they are also undocumented. So this novel, like I said, it reads more like a memoir. It doesn't really have much of a plot. A lot of it is very stream of consciousness in a sense, because you'll sort of like see this like story, the present, which is her last year at Harvard, and then it dips into like flashbacks, and then suddenly it will like dip into like her thought tangents about some sort of topic, and then it goes back to the present. And so it can be a little bit like disorienting at times, and I think it can feel kind of chaotic, but like that was probably the point. I do question why though she chose to publish it as fiction. I don't know if it was because she wanted to take some artistic liberties, which a lot of great nonfiction writers do, or just because she wanted to use like the guise of fiction as a kind of protection. I enjoyed this. I think it was probably because I like a lot of the topics she was discussing, because a lot of this novel deals with like an examination of Latino identity, and specifically the indigenous part of Latino identity. Like, what does it mean to come from the exterminated indigenous peoples, as well as West African slaves, and then the Spanish conquistadors, to have this bloodline of both the colonized and the colonizer within you. There's also an examination, too, of like having this visibly marginalized identity in this very wealthy white space, and what does it mean to feel like you have to sort of like perform your identity for these people, and like how does that impact like even your like intimate relationships with people. There's some stuff too with her family towards the end, like it's more than halfway, honestly, and then that does sort of like pick up the pacing in terms of like plot. But yeah, like if you have an interest in decolonial identity and undocumented immigrants and just a young woman in the early 2010s in college at Harvard, I would recommend it. But like I said, it does read more like a memoir. If you're not really into like stuff that's not very plot based, then you might not like this. But I thought it was pretty solid. Again, probably because I like some of the topics discussed. So I would rate it like 3.5 to 4 stars. The 6th book I finished in April was The 7 Moons of Maali Almeida by Shehan Karunatilaka. Sorry, I'm probably not saying his name right. I mentioned this book in one of my videos a couple videos ago about books that are like White Lotus. This isn't really anything like White Lotus. I mean, there are like some themes maybe the last season touches on. But this is a good book. I enjoyed it nonetheless. It won the Booker Prize in 2022, and I can see why. It is very experimental. Honestly, after I read it, I kind of had to like sit and process it because it was such a trip. I don't know if I've read anything like this. It reminded me a lot at times of Salman Rushdie's The Satanic Verses, but not as slow. That book was kind of a slog at times. So the story, it takes place in the early 90s in Sri Lanka during their civil war, which spans apparently 25 years. I had no idea about this. And this war photographer and gambler, Maali, he wakes up dead, floating in a lake. But his body is in the lake. He is in this sort of purgatory, which is essentially like a long line at the doctor's office. And he gets to the front of the line, and the woman behind the counter tells him that he has 7 moons to wrap up whatever loose ends he needs to on Earth. But he has to hurry because once those 7 moons are gone, he'll be stuck as a ghost forever. And if he wants to move beyond purgatory, he then needs to prepare himself to go into the light. And if he goes into the light, then he will forget everything that happened in his Earth life. And so he's like, no, I don't want to forget because I want to find out who killed me. So he comes back to Earth as a ghost, and on Earth he sees all these other ghosts and he can interact with them, and there's all these like weird demons and spirits that borrow a lot from Sri Lankan folklore, which was one of the things that I didn't really get. Like, I think that's one of the things that I couldn't fully appreciate the novel in what it was doing because I don't have a background in Sri Lankan folklore, and I think there's also some Hindu mysticism mixed in there as well. But he wants to lead 2 of his friends, his lover and his friend, his roommate, Didi, his lover, Jackie, his roommate, to these secret photos that he took that he think will really implicate the political heads in Sri Lanka. And so there's all these different obstacles, both in the physical realm and in the spiritual realm, that he has to navigate. That is essentially the book. Now, this book, one of the other unique aspects of it is that it is written in second person. It is written with the you tense. And so I don't know if I've read a book like this. I don't know. I maybe have read excerpts of certain like chapters maybe authors have done in the second person, but I don't know if I've read a full novel like that. But it actually works. And there's times I didn't even really notice that the novel was in second person, it flowed pretty seamlessly, so I thought that was done pretty well. I also think that the novel strikes a good job between balancing the horror of Sri Lankan civil war and the brutality in a way that it uses dark humor, but it also doesn't gloss over things. And I think it has that, like, good balance. Because I find that sometimes dark humor just doesn't come off well, like, tonally. I think that was maybe kind of my issue with Frankenstein and Baghdad. And I feel like it was a really good way to, like, fully capture the brutality as well as all of the corruption of all of these political figures and all these different warring groups. So this novel, it's political, it's also existential. It not only questions life and death, but it also talks a lot about, like, personal morality, as well as, like, the evil that exists within mankind. And I think one of the quotes that was really outstanding to me was, someone says to Maali, "You know why the battle of good versus evil is so one-sided, Malin? Because evil is better organized, better equipped, and better paid. It is not monsters or yakas or demons we should fear. Organized collectives of evildoers who think they are performing the work of the righteous. That is what should make us shudder." So I rated this 4 stars. I actually really did start to get into the story later on the more I read. And yeah, I think it's solid. I think it was really well done. I do think that some of the stuff, I don't think I could fully appreciate the richness of it because I don't have any knowledge of Sri Lankan folklore or history. So I think if you do have that knowledge, it will be even more rich for you. But yeah, I can definitely see why it was shortlisted, or actually at least shortlisted. It won, but why, people thought it was really outstanding for the Booker Prize in 2022. So yeah, 4 stars. The 7th book I read in April was The Shape of Water by Guillermo del Toro and Daniel Kraus. So I saw this suggested on Goodreads. I wanted to read it because it deals with a merman-like creature. And after reading the Pisces, I was like, okay, let me kind of get into that theme and see if there's any other books like that. Yeah, it's very, very different from the Pisces, and I'll go into why and how in a little bit. But this is a weird mashup of, like, fantasy, romance, science fiction, and historical fiction. It takes place in the 60s, early 60s, and at this place in Baltimore called the Ockham Aerospace Research Center, the U.S. government has captured this sea creature that they got from the Amazon. And there's a janitor named Alissa, and she is mute. And she slowly ends up falling in love with this sea creature, even though we don't really see a lot of, like, how they're communicating, because she feels like she is being seen for the first time. She's a janitor that works the night shift. And then another guy who works there is this complete sadist. His name is Richard Strickland. And he was one of the people that captured the creature in the Amazon jungle, which was a grueling expedition for 17 months, and it, like, that combined with his service in Korea made him essentially lose his mind. So he just, like, wants to dissect the creature and see, how it works. And Alissa wants to save the creature. And then we have this Russian agent, double agent, known as Bob Helfstetler, that's not his real name, who works there, and he's trying to, like, smuggle secrets back to the Soviets. There's a whole lot going on. There's some other characters, too. Alissa tries to, like, smuggle this creature out with the help of, like, her other janitor friend, Zelda, a black woman who was kind of, like, stereotyped and troped, honestly, in this. And I don't know if the authors were... I don't think they were probably aware of that. And then she also has this neighbor, this closeted gay man, who she is really close to. He lives next to her above this movie theater, and he also tries to help. I actually was enjoying this book because it was pretty like, okay, like what is going to happen next? Where is this going? But then I felt like the last 50 pages, my suspension of disbelief just didn't really hold up anymore. I just kind of had a hard time seeing that, like, she would fall in love with this creature. Also, the creature is not actually a merman. He is, like, a fish, essentially a giant fish, like a fish-like humanoid. So, this might be kind of a spoiler, but if you want to, like, me to, like, you can skip to the next part in the video, the next book, if you actually plan on reading this. But, like, the sex scenes in this felt gross because it felt like bestiality. Whereas at least in the Pisces, he felt more like he is at least half man, except for his tail. And this was also written in a way that felt like very male gazy. As the feds are closing in, Alissa just like she has a thing with heels. She loves wearing heels, which is fine. But like as the feds are closing in, she literally just grabs her new silver lame heels and she's running in these heels in like a deluge outside, and then she just throws on like a bathrobe, and then her bathrobe just like happens to fall open and expose her breasts. I was like, come on, this is literally the cinematic male gaze. Apparently this was also released at the same time as the film. Del Toro is like the film director, and then Kraus is the writer, so I guess this was more of Del Toro's vision, and then Kraus did more of the writing, but yeah, I don't know. It was also just, like, the ending was just, like, too convenient. Like, oh, that person just happened to be there. I mean, I think that's what the novel does well, besides, like, leading you to, like, wonder what's going to happen, is that I do think it did kind of portray this weird eeriness of the early 60s. Like, there was this weird tension simmering underneath as the country was like in this state of transition. I mean, I wasn't alive then, but I think that was conveyed really well. There is a lot of commentary, or some commentary, on social issues like civil rights marches and like the way gay people were treated, and it felt like it was a little bit too ham-fisted. The other thing for me, though, that honestly annoyed me about this book, besides, like, the ending and the very male gaziness of it and the lack of, like, my suspension of disbelief, was that it is so overwritten. It is very much has a lot of purple prose at parts, and it is kind of ridiculous. And so I am going to read some excerpts to illustrate that. One example is when they capture the monster in the very beginning. This is what Strickland sees. The monster is known as Deus Bronchia to the locals. At last rises from the shoal, the blood sun carving the Serengeti, the ancient eye of eclipse, the ocean scalping open the new world, the insatiable glacier, the sea spray spew, the bacterial bite, the single-celled seethe, the species spit. I'm not even going to go on. It just goes on and on and on. Like, it's a whole... There's also some drawings in here. Paragraph. I was like, come on now. This is just so melodramatic and overwrought. I don't even know. I rated it 3 stars because I thought it was, like, okay. But, like... there was just aspects of the writing and the plot I didn't really like. I think it is very male, as someone on Goodreads said, and there is a huge difference between this book and the Pisces. The Pisces you read, you're like, yeah, a woman wrote this. And you read this, and you're like, yeah, some man wrote this. So, yeah, 3 stars. And the last book I finished in the month of April was The Sleepwalkers by Scarlett Thomas. I talked about this book in my Books That Are Like White Lotus video. This does not really live up to that. It is literally billed as Patricia Highsmith meets The White Lotus. Okay, this just was not really that good. I mean, I did finish it because I was like, I do want to see how it ends. This follows a newly married couple, Evelyn and Richard, and they're on this very extended honeymoon, and they go to a Greek island at this little tiny exclusive resort. And the entire novel is written in letters. It is epistolary, which I've realized I have an issue with. I have an issue when novels are written in letters or emails, because I feel like what happens is one of two things. Either you cannot see how the characters interact with other people in real time, or it is very much telling and not showing. And that was my big issue with this. It was all telling and not showing. And it is also, the couple are writing letters to each other after some sort of crime has happened. And so this entire novel is written in second person, which is really weird that this is the second novel I have read right after another one that is second person. But while in the Seven Moons of Ali Maldia, or Maali, I always confuse the names. But in the other novel, well, that worked. This didn't really work. It begins where Evelyn is writing to Richard, like summarizing everything that's happened to them. And this goes on for like 50 pages. Like, if an author wants to write letters, then at least make them feel like letters. Like, realistically, someone would not sit down in the early morning hours and handwrite pages and pages and pages telling their spouse like stuff they already know. That just didn't really work. And then Richard, who was like this hedge fund bro, he also writes her a really long letter, handwritten. Again, it just doesn't really seem in Richard's nature to do that. We learn about like their backstory in bits and pieces, and in the meantime, where they're staying, there's this hotel owner, Isabella, and she's clearly trying to get with Richard. She's also writing a screenplay about this other couple that stayed there the year prior, that they walked into the sea and they drowned, and they were known as the Sleepwalkers. And that is what her screenplay is about. And yeah, it's a little suspicious. There is some unsavory stuff that goes down, and we learn more unsavory stuff about Evelyn and Richard and their relationship. But I think it just didn't really work for me, because I have seen these themes explored in other novels and done in a way that was better. Marital Breakdown, just read that in Joan Didion's Run River. And a man that has his like really awful secret in his past actually reminded me of a Mary Gaitskill short story in her collection, Because They Wanted To, which was just done much more better. I didn't really think the writing was that solid. It definitely is experimental, not just in the letters, but like there's a play transcript, there's like an audio recording, parts of this stuff, all of it, like even the letters end abruptly or they're like cut out. I also think that in order to be experimental, you have to be like a pretty strong writer, and I don't think the writing here was that solid. Even sort of like the exploration of like why Richard is the way he is because of like his sexual desires, it was so stupid. It just like was not realistic. It's just like these characters are awful, and I don't mind awful characters, but I felt like they're so awful and they're just kind of like flattened in their awfulness, if you know what I mean. So this is like 2.5 to 3 stars. I think it did get better later on. The beginning was a little rough, but yeah, I honestly can't really recommend this book. It's not up to par of White Lotus or Patricia Highsmith's work. Yeah, so those were the 8 books I read in the month of April. And yeah, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment, subscribe, let me know if you read any good books this month. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.